So we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount and how it heavily influenced Bill W. putting together the 12 steps. He was highly influenced by this section of the teaching of Jesus found in Matthew 5-7, famously called the Sermon on the Mount because Jesus is sitting on a mountainside teaching this massive crowd. And basically what he starts off with is 8 signs of what does it look like to be fully surrendered to your higher power. And those eventually became the 12 steps. After he talks about this alternative way of being human, this alternative way of living down this narrow path that the world typically doesn't think and do, he then goes into 6 different areas of our life that are changed, surrendered to our higher power. And the first 2 topics he talks about, interestingly enough, is resentment and sex. Isn't that interesting? That he talks about this is what it looks like when you fully surrender to your higher power. And this is how it changes some areas of your life. The first 2 he chooses are resentment, which we looked at last week. You can catch that video if you haven't seen it yet. And today we're going to look at what does he teach about sex. So here's the text that we're taking this from. This is Jesus teaching, and he says in Matthew chapter 5, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. In the original Greek, that principle applies to both genders. So it can be a woman looking at a man looking at a woman. It could be a man looking at a man. It could be a woman looking at a woman. So I don't get hung up on gender here. That's not the point he's making. When you look at another person lustfully, you've already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Some of you, you're looking at this verse and you're thinking right now, well, this confirms what I've always thought. The Bible is way too uptight about sex. Here we go. We're talking about lust and you're going to go to hell if you do it. I think by the time we unpack this, you're going to see that the biblical view of sex is one of the most attractive things about the teaching of Jesus and about biblical theology. 3 things we're going to look at today. What is the biblical view of sex? Because it's very different than the way our culture views sex. Number 2, what is lust? And number 3, how do we overcome lust? If you're like me, as a sex addict, I realized that lust was the root of all of my acting out behaviors. And if I wanted to get rid of all forms of acting out, I had to pull out the root of lust. Otherwise, the fruit was still going to manifest in my life. This is a very relevant teaching from Jesus today when it comes to our own struggle with our sexual integrity issues. The very first thing I want to point out before we look at what is the biblical view of sex is I want us to take a look at what is our cultural view of sex. How does the world view sex today? And what Jesus is saying in this teaching is that our culture, the world, doesn't look at sex the way he does, and it has too low of a view of sex. The world tends to look at sex in 2 dimensions, that it is an appetite and it's just another area of life. In other words, it's just an appetite of your body, just like an appetite for water, just like an appetite for food, just like an appetite for air, just like an appetite for anything that our body craves or wants. That's all it is. It's just an appetite. And the world also sees it as just another compartment of life. And what Jesus is saying is the world has too low of a view of sex because they don't recognize and they don't respect its potential power over our life. And the way he points this out is what he calls hell. Now, that word that he uses for hell is a specific word in the Greek called Gehenna. It's an actual place. It was the garbage dump outside of Jerusalem. So all his original listeners sitting on that mountainside, when he said lust and sex has the potential to bring Gehenna into your life, they knew exactly what he was talking about. Because outside the city, in the garbage dump, where all the citizens threw all their trash, there were employees that were hired to perpetually burn it. What it looked like outside the city was a lake of fire, just constantly burning day and night, so that all the citizens could dump their trash there and it just eventually turns to ash. What he's saying is, if you don't have a proper respect for sex, it has the potential to absolutely consume everything in your life. When you don't have a proper view of sex, you're inviting Gehenna into your existence. If we took a moment to receive testimonies from all the addicts watching today, we could all testify Gehenna stories. I did not respect the power of sex and lust, and it has consumed every dimension of my life. When I look at the trail before recovery, all I see is scorched earth. What Jesus is teaching, I can validate. If you don't have a proper respect for the power of lust in your life, it will destroy everything in your life. So the world just sees it as an appetite. Oh, it's just another compartment of life. Jesus says that's too low of a view. We need to understand the potential power. We need to recognize it and we need to respect it. One of the ways that this gets translated into our program is what's known as the three circles. The three circles in SAA refers to outer circle, which are those behaviors that promote life and health and keep us far away from our inner circle. Our inner circle is how we define sobriety. Our program leaves it in such a way that all of us can define sobriety on our own terms. So we put in our inner circle what we feel like the line is. When we cross that line, we call it, quote, relapse. Some people use the term slip, which I think is dangerous because it sounds very minimizing. And most betrayed partners really bristle at that term slip because of the perceived minimization of it. Let's talk a moment about middle circle. What is all too common as we define our middle circles is that we put opportunities for little hits, little activities of lust, because we still don't have a proper respect for the destructive power of lust. And so we'll go to meetings and guys will talk about, yeah, I spent too much time in middle circle today. Middle circle is supposed to be the yellow light of our recovery. It's supposed to be those activities that we need to practice caution because they could lead to inner circle. So we need to be on high alert. But what too often we do is because we have a low view of sex and lust and we don't appreciate the power, the destructive power, the ability for our middle circle to bring Gehenna into our life, we play around with lust. And we spend time on YouTube, we watch R-rated movies, we allow ourselves to take that double glance at someone and get that little hit of dopamine, that little taste of lust, and we don't have a proper respect for the destructive power. That's the biblical view of sex. That's what Jesus is saying. Compared to the world has a low view of sex. They don't appreciate its power. They just think it's another appetite. They think it's a compartment of life like our career, and it's no big deal. He says that's far from the truth. Here is what the Bible does teach about sex. It is a gift. God created it. When God created Adam and Eve, he gave them the capacity and ability to have sexual intimacy. He said it is, quote, good. So it was a good, godly thing. It was a gift that was meant to be within the relationship of covenant between a husband and a wife. It is a beautiful gift that an entire book of the Bible, Song of Solomon, is basically a celebration of marital sexuality. The Bible has a very high view of sex. It is a gift from our Creator that is meant for the covenant of marriage. It is a gift that can easily become a god. When we don't respect its power, we can take that which is a created thing and we can make it a substitute for our Creator. We can look to something like sex as the means to which we find our identity, our value, and we offset things like shame in our life. Another way to look at it is this analogy that you've probably heard before, and that is a fire is a beautiful, wonderful thing as long as it stays in the fireplace. When you transfer it to the rug, you're going to have a problem in your life. That's the biblical view of sex. Sex is a gift that's meant to be in the fireplace of marriage. But when it spills out of that covenant relationship, that's when we have scorched earth. That's when it burns the whole house down. That's a proper view of what the Bible teaches and what Jesus teaches about sex. That it is a great gift, but it is a lousy God. For those of us with our sex addiction, what we did was we took something that God created that was good, that was meant for the fireplace of marriage, and we allowed it to spill outside of that context, and we made it a God in our life. We sacrificed money to this God. We sacrificed time to this God. We sacrificed careers to this God. We sacrificed relationships to this God. Sex is a great gift, but it is a lousy God. And when we make it a God, we don't have proper respect for its place or its power. You probably heard me talk about something that we sex addicts are very familiar with, and that is shame. And shame usually shows up in three ways. We call it the three eyes of shame. It's when we feel either insignificant, incompetent, or imprisoned in some way. We feel like I don't have value, I'm not worthy of love, I'm a mistake, that's insignificance. Or we feel like I can't do anything. Not only am I a mistake, all I do is make mistakes. I'm stupid, I don't have the ability to do things right, I'm incompetent. Or imprisonment. I don't have agency, I don't have power, I don't have choices, I don't have a vote, I don't have a voice, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I'm in prison. These are the three eyes of shame. What we did with our shame is we tried to offset our shame with the God of sex. We did not know how to process these emotions, so we sexualized them. When we acted out, it was an unhealthy way of regulating a very unpleasant emotion like shame. The problem with using sex as a God to offset shame in our life is that it doesn't take away the shame, it actually multiplies the shame. So shame was the catalyst that started the acting out, and after we act out, the end product is regenerated shame. And so as we went through the addiction cycle and we turned to sex as our higher power, the result was not less shame, but more shame. And when you think about sex, there is hardly anything else in the human experience that can make us feel significant, competent, and powerful like our sexuality. And so we turn to sex to meet a need that only our Creator can meet. We made something that was created into a God into our life. We didn't have a healthy respect for the power and the destructive power that it could have. So that's a proper biblical view of sex, and it's important to understand that theology before we drill down into lust. So let's get to lust. What is lust? According to the teaching of Jesus in this verse, it's two things. Number one, it's an impersonal desire. It's desiring to be one with someone physically, but I don't want to be one with you in any other way. It is taking our sexuality and removing it from the fireplace of covenant relationship. Instead of a committed relationship, it's now being freely shared with anybody. So I want to be physically one with you, but I don't want to be personally one with you. What the Bible teaches is that sex is a sacred, intimate, even integrative act. In a mystical, mathematical way, two people become one. There is a third entity that is created when two people enter into a covenant relationship and they consummate that covenant with sexual intimacy. They are experiencing whole self oneness. They are becoming one in every way with each other, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Lust is splitting that apart. Lust is when we split the body and the soul and we just focus on the body. When we separate lust from the fireplace of marriage, when we separate lust to just one shallow dimension of physicality and body, what we're doing is we're inviting Gehenna into our life. Look at this quote from C.S. Lewis. Unless you're willing to make a complete personal commitment to somebody from whom you're wanting a completely bodily commitment, then you're really not after that person. You're after an experience. What lust does is it dehumanizes the other. They are no longer a whole person with spirit, soul, and body. They are just an object. They are no longer someone who is created in the image and likeness of God and worthy of dignity, value, and respect. It's impersonal. We reduce them to one dimension of their life, and they are just an object that exists to meet our sexual needs. So it is an impersonal desire. It's taking our sexuality and taking it outside of the oneness of a covenant of marriage. The second thing he says is It's an inordinate desire. What that means is it's disordered, it's unreasonable, it's excessive, it's unrealistic. It's trying to take something that God created that is good, and we try to get from it what you can only get from God. So it's inordinate. Our sexuality has the potential to be a glimpse of heaven in our marriage, or a taste of Gehenna in every area of our life. It depends on how we view it and how we use it. So how do we overcome it? We've talked about the biblical view of sexuality. We've talked about what is lust. It's an impersonal desire. It's using people. It's pursuing an experience instead of oneness. And it's an inordinate desire. It's a substitute for God. It's relying upon sex to provide only that which our Creator can provide. So how do we overcome it? Well, Jesus uses hyperbole. We're not supposed to take him literally when we look at this. But when it comes to overcoming lust, he says two things. He mentions gouge out your eye and cut off your hand. Do not take this literally. Have eye removal surgery or cut off a limb. That's not what we're talking about here. He's using a teaching tool called hyperbole. It's an exaggeration. He uses an exaggeration to make an important point. There's two ways you overcome lust. You have to change the way you view things and do things. Viewing things is with the eye, doing things is with the hand. So let's unpack that. You've got to change drastically how you view things, your perspective, how you see things. Why? Because willpower is not enough to beat lust. So you've got to change the way you view people. You've got to change the way you view sex. You've got to change the way you view your own body. You've got to change the way you see media. You've got to change the way you see your higher power. You've got to have a radical surgery on your eye. That is, you have to change your perspective. You have to completely reimagine the way you view things. And secondly, he says, you've got to cut off your hand. You've got to change the way you do things. You've got to change your practices. You've got to change your behavior. You have to change your rituals. You have to change your environment. There's going to be some drastic measures that we have to take to cut out things from our life if we're going to beat the battle with lust. There are certain things you can't do anymore. There are certain people you don't need to be around anymore. There are certain places that you should not go to anymore. There are certain activities that you shouldn't engage anymore. There are certain situations that you now need to avoid. It's not enough to just do one of these and neglect the other. You're not going to win. You have to both focus on cognition, which is how you view things, and behavior modification, how you do things. You can't just focus on one. Sex and lust are too powerful. They will lead to Gehenna in our life if we don't have a proper respect for them. And I'm looking down as I go. What am I doing? I am having a proper respect for the power of lust. That was my higher power for decades. And if I'm not careful, if I don't have my guard up, it can easily take the throne of my life again. And when it does, it leads to destruction. I'm inviting Gehenna into my life. Here's the irony. Our battle with lust is the only battle I can think of that you win by retreating, by giving up, by fleeing. Every verse in the Bible that talks about lust or sexual immorality has one theme, one strategy: run, flee. The Bible never tells you to take a stand and fight against lust. You will lose. You've got to gouge out an eye. You've got to cut off a hand. You have to take drastic measures in how you view and do things, or it will bring Gehenna into your life. And so you don't win by standing up to it. You win by admitting defeat and retreating, by fleeing. And so when I put VidAngel on our TV and it filters out inappropriate material, what am I doing? I am fleeing. I am respecting the power of lust in my life. When I go to the grocery store and I choose not to check out in this lane, but instead this lane, because there's a person in that lane that is tempting for me and I don't want to expose myself to that, what am I doing? I'm fleeing. When I'm in one aisle and there's a person that is tempting to me and I decide to go down another aisle, what am I doing? I'm respecting its power and I'm fleeing. I don't play around with it in my middle circle. That brings Gehenna into my life. I don't dance on the line. I stay 5 feet from the line. And I'm not saying that I live my life in fear. What I am saying is I follow the teaching of Jesus and I live my life with a healthy respect that sex, which is a good thing, a gift from God, can become my God like it did for decades if I don't have a proper view of it and if I don't have the agency to focus on what am I viewing and what am I doing and do I have a proper respect of sex and lust. Let me end with this thought. This is my observation, not something that I find in the literature. This is just my own observation. Most people in the world are either unmarried or unhappily married. There is a small fraction of people who would call themselves genuinely happily married. I'm in that category today. I can honestly say that I am happily married to Jacqueline. Let me tell you the secret. I no longer look to sex to provide my identity, to provide my value, to offset my shame, to be the most important, passionate pursuit of my life. Sex is no longer my higher power. But I also didn't turn to Jacqueline and make her my higher power, which is all too common in our program. We go from sex being our higher power to our spouse being our higher power. And we try to get all of our needs met and find our identity, value, worth, and purpose in our spouse. And we make them a God. And they can't meet those needs any more than sex could. Those needs are met by our Creator. The reason I am happily married today is because I drink from the well of living water in my relationship with God, and it is the only source that quenches my thirst. When I turn to any other substitute, I am left thirsty, empty, unfulfilled, and unsatisfied. When I turn to Jacqueline as my source, when I turn to sex as my source, when I turn to my career as my source, when I turn to any other substitute, I am left with emptiness. But when I drink from that fountain every day, and I find my significance in my higher power, I find my competence and value and worth in my higher power, I find my agency and my power in Him, not in anything else. That's when I find abundant living, like Jesus describes in the Sermon on the Mount, and that leads to a very happy marriage. When two people are drinking from the same source and it's providing an abundant life for them, they have the capacity to have a happy marriage. So, what I'm going to leave you with is just some reflections. Number one, why do you think we're told to flee in the Bible when it comes to lust instead of standing and fighting against it? Why would Jesus teach this? And number two, what was one thing from today's devotional that challenged you to think differently in some area of your life?